Synchronizing your breath with movement in Qigong practice. That is going to be the topic of this episode of Qi Life. So this topic, again, it came in from a question from someone who watches the channel, and I thought it could be quite an interesting topic to talk about because it is something where I'd say there's some fairly common misconceptions around this. So much so that you could even look at it as there being two quite contrasting schools of thought about whether you should synchronize your breath with the movement, maybe even all the time, and another school of thought that is very much of the mind that you shouldn't ever try to synchronize your breath with the movement. Now, as with many of these things, it's not necessarily that one is right and one is wrong. It's often that actually they're focusing on different things. So they're both right in their own way, but it really depends on your specific application, what you're trying to achieve. And they are wrong in so far that they maybe extend a particular way of doing things beyond actually the application where it's actually beneficial, and they don't recognize the other side. And so, yeah, I'll talk a little bit about both of these and about some of the effect of synchronizing our breath with the movement and why we might want to do that. But then the contrasting why sometimes we may not want to synchronize our breath with the movement and reasons behind that as well. Because within Qigong practice, as I've said many times in these vlogs, there are three main tools that we use generally within Qigong practice: the mind, the body, and the breath. Now, sometimes we'll make use of other things in our external environment and so on, but generally mind, body, and breath, these are all working together as a way to become aware of and then develop skill with our energy. So how we use our breath, it often plays a really big and important role within Qigong practices. So even those people who are of the mind that you shouldn't try to synchronize your breath with different movements in Qigong practices, generally still recognize the importance of the breath, right? And so that's like, okay, but they're not trying to synchronize. And so generally these people who are of that school of thought, that mind, they're mindful of maybe making the breathing deep, making it slow, making it relaxed. But other than that, just letting it do its own thing. And there can be value in that in some practices, and I'll come back to specifically why, and where actually that's actually very important in some practices. On the other hand, there are those who do focus, quite extensively on synchronizing breath with the movement. Now, what happens when we synchronize our breath with the movement? There are two main things, that come from this. Of course, there's going to be more. It depends how much detail you want to get into, but I'll keep it relatively simple in terms of two main things. So one is when we're moving in different ways with our external body, it's sending force through our internal body. It's shaping and moving things around, and we often use this as a way to massage the tissues internally, or sometimes to compress them. You wouldn't necessarily always call it massage, but to stretch or compress them for various reasons. Sometimes it's simply to just make things softer and get the energy to flow through. Sometimes it's to concentrate energy in a particular area, or send it somewhere, but we're using external movement as a way to direct this internally. Now, of course, our breath also from the inside creates changing pressures that move through our body. And so generally, when we coordinate the external action of what we're doing, I'm just making random movements here, but you get the idea of moving around in different ways and how that's going to affect things internally. If you combine that external effect with also changing pressure internally from the expansion and contraction of the breath, you make this much more effective. And so, and this goes beyond just inhaling and exhaling. Also, when we hold the breath sometimes, and the way this can build pressure and so on in different parts of the body. And so it makes it much more effective for moving energy around to different parts of the body, or stimulating it, or getting it to flow and so on. So that's one of the big reasons. It amplifies the effect of the external movements by having an internal pressure change supporting that. Now, another part of this is more to do with the taking in or the sending out of energy, and all of the qualities that go with that. And so generally we'd lump these all together and refer to them as different qualities of yin and yang. And so sometimes within a particular practice, we're wanting to take energy in. Again, I'm doing random movements. It could be all sorts of different things, but we're focusing on that yin, that drawing of energy in. Other times we're focusing on the yang, the sending of the energy out. And again, there's a whole lot of things that combine together with this in terms of how the muscles activate, how the nerves activate, how the internal organs activate, with the inhale versus the exhale within the movement, that makes that more effective. So generally we'll inhale when we're wanting to take energy in. Surprise, surprise, because we're taking breath in, and so that then fits very well with taking energy in generally. And we'll exhale when we're wanting to send energy out. And that affects, again, it affects the muscles, the nerves, the blood flow, and so on, to actually make that more effective at sending the energy out. So same movement done just with the breath, just doing whatever, won't have as much of a strong yin or yang emphasis taking the energy in or out as if we coordinate and synchronize our breath with that movement to enhance that yin or yang quality. The same applies to other yin and yang qualities. It's not just all about taking in and sending out. It can be about rising up or sinking down. Again, this relates to yin and yang and so on. And so we'll use the breath to strengthen and amplify that so that everything's working together. So we don't have the body doing one thing, the breath doing another thing, and the mind doing something else. The body, if the body is focused on yang, then the breath supports that with yang, and then that helps the mind to also tune in and be aware of, or help to also strengthen that yang action, or the yin action as well, of course. So those are some of the reasons why we would use the breath and synchronization of the breath with movements. And that's really, really useful. It can really make a lot of practices much more powerful when we get that synchronization, and we'll experience the flow of our energy more strongly, and so on. But there's also times when we specifically don't want to do that. And there's a variety of reasons for this, why we wouldn't want to. So I'll start with some of the just really basic, practical, physical ones. And this is, again, if we're talking about working with principles of yin and yang, there are lots of different aspects of yin and yang. And so one good aspect that this applies to is speed. So generally, yin is slow and yang is fast, contrasting qualities. And when we do something slowly, it does focus on and have an effect of taking energy in more, storing energy more. When we do things more quickly, it focuses on moving, circulating the energy, and releasing, sending energy out more. If you want to really make more use of this contrast between fast and slow, sometimes you might want to slow a movement right down, much slower than you could breathe in a synchronized way with the movement. And so otherwise you would be limiting yourself to how slowly you could do it according to your breath capacity. Now, that can be, to a certain extent, that's good to actually use the slowing down as a way to develop your breath capacity. But there's additional benefits to be explored by going much, much more slowly than you could possibly breathe, synchronize with the movement. So if you limit yourself to always synchronizing your breath with the movement, you're going to reach a like, that's as far as I can go, and you can't explore and gain that further benefit. Same applies to actually going faster. There's a certain speed that you'll be able to do different movements at that you can synchronize your breath, the inhale, the exhale with the movement. Fine, great. And you can explore right up to that point. Great, you'll get a certain amount of benefit. You're coordinating the external action with the internal change of pressures. Awesome. But if you want to go faster than that, and really explore what can come from even faster movement, and there are benefits that come from that in terms of how the energy flows and how it develops relationships between different parts of the body and so on. Well, you're going to have to no longer synchronize your breath with movement in order to do that, or otherwise you're like, oh, that's as much as I can get out of that. But there's much more that can be gained and explored. So there's simple physical reasons why sometimes you go, okay, cool. Maybe for a movement that you normally synchronize your breath with, if you really want to explore the very slow, the very fast, you need to go beyond that. All right. Other reasons why sometimes you may not want to synchronize your breath with the movement. A lot of this comes down to just allowing the unconscious mind, and you could talk about it as like the wisdom of the body, to be able to dictate things for itself. And when you do this within different practices, often you'll find, even though you're not intentionally trying to synchronize your breath with the movement, that naturally a type of synchronization occurs. Because as your body wants to do something more yin, it will tend to breathe in a yin way. As your mind is guiding this process and you're focused on doing something more yang, your breath will tend to fall into line and do that. But if you are focusing too much on synchronizing your breath with the movement, sometimes you might do that in a way where you're actually forcing your body to do something that's out of step with what would allow the energy to flow most freely, most easily. And so in that situation, you're better to just let the breath do what it wants to do and allow the unconscious mind to direct that process. This applies particularly with movements, more sophisticated movements, or where there's a more sophisticated rhythm within the movement, or things like that, where it can be that, oh, hey, actually, during this phase, depending on the focus on what exactly is going on within the energy, or particularly as you change the speed, there might be times when during one phase it's better to inhale and another it's better to exhale. But when you do it at a slightly different speed or with a different rhythm, the body actually wants to move in a different way to harmonize yin and yang. One of the things with yin and yang is there's again many different qualities, aspects of yin and yang that are all working together in different ways all of the time. So it's not just as simple there's yin, there's yang, that's all there is. With all the different things going on within our body, some things might be in a yang phase while others are supporting them in a yin phase, and then there's something else in a yang phase and something else in a yin phase, and there's different combinations of yin and yang all the time. And we never ever have just yang or just yin. There always has to be some balance between them. And so we just rely on the unconscious mind to dictate that with the breath. So in some practices, that's a really useful, valuable principle to follow. Allow the breath to find its own way. Not necessarily in all practices, though, right? Because in some, it's really helpful to have some conscious direction of the breath. There are clear, established patterns that, breathing in this way is going to strengthen a certain aspect of the practice. And so why not do that? Why not get that strength of using the breath to support the practice in a conscious way? So I guess this comes to another reason, probably the last main reason why some people think that you shouldn't synchronize the breath with the movement at all, or shouldn't try to. Again, patterns may arise naturally. And that is they're really concerned that by consciously intervening in the breath, that you may set up a pattern of then consciously controlling the breath to some degree all the time, or interfering with that natural pattern beyond even just your Qigong practice or your martial arts practice or whatever it is, that you'll actually sort of, in a sense, break or interfere with that unconscious breath regulation mechanism. so that rather than just allowing your breath to respond naturally to what you're doing, sometimes breathing faster, slower, in, out, at different times when different things are going on, that you'll like kind of have a background regulation going on all the time. And that would not be healthy. Because there's so many different things that happen all around us and that we want to do and try to do, and different intentions and so on, that most of the time the best way to do that is to allow our breath to just respond naturally. And certainly this is something that can happen when people do a lot of regulating their breath, and particularly when they have the wrong idea behind it, that they actually think that this is a good idea to regulate their breath consciously all the time, that it starts to flow over into, all other areas of their life, and that stops them from flowing naturally with the harmony and the rhythms, all around them in nature, and just in their activities. And so it's not that they're wrong about this. It's like, yeah, that's a valid thing to be aware of, just allowing the breath to be regulated unconsciously and to allow that to happen. But it doesn't mean that you can't also use it as a useful tool consciously sometimes as well. And so a helpful balance as well, a helpful thing is to understand both of these contrasting viewpoints and what's going on behind them, so that you can avoid the trap of becoming too much of an absolutist in either one or the other. Okay, I'm going to make a corny, cheesy quote here, because only Sith deal in absolutes. That's a Star Wars reference. And the idea being they don't understand the balance of the Force. Turns out the Jedi didn't either. Anyway, but that's the thing. The whole thing with harmony between yin and yang is understanding that yin and yang aren't actually absolutes. They are relative states relative to each other. And within yin, there's the seed of yang, yang, there's the seed of yin, they feed into each other and so on. And it's to actually understand the dynamic, the contrast between them, and how you can work, how these can work together in harmony. And this is what really we want in terms of ultimately for ourselves in relation to harmonization of our breath or synchronization of our breath with movement, is to understand when it's a useful tool and when we should let go of it and let our unconscious direct that process. So generally, we want to use synchronization within specific exercises, specific practices where it's useful. And even within those, there might be times when we break away from that and we don't use that synchronization. So I've explored a couple of reasons why you do that, being just going too fast, too slow. Another reason can actually be level of learning or skill with a certain practice as well. Because if you're trying to learn a new movement and it's quite sophisticated, sometimes to try to do the movement and also breathe and then also pay attention to what's going on in your body, it can be too much all at once. So you might go through a phase of just focusing on the movement, not worrying about the breath, just like, just breathe naturally, focus on the movement. And then you might bring in the breath once you're comfortable with the movement, because then you can coordinate them in a healthy, harmonious way. And then you might bring in more layers of awareness. You can layer these things together. But so yeah, knowing when to use it within a practice, and then also knowing when to let go and just let the breath come naturally. And sometimes if you've done a lot of synchronizing your breath with movement, you may have fallen into that pattern of like starting to regulate your breath all the time. And it can be really useful as a practice to consciously not synchronize your breath with movement, to do maybe some practices that you're familiar with and go, you know what? I'm consciously not going to try to regulate my breath. I'm going to allow it to just be unconsciously regulated, to help you to then do that more easily in other aspects of your life as well. Okay, hopefully that was interesting. Hopefully that's useful to someone. I look forward to seeing you in another vlog soon.